Hi, everyone. Welcome to our April Book Club Favorites event. This month, we're discussing Hang the Moon from New York Times bestselling author Jeannette Walls. Today, we are joined by the author herself. We are also joined by our marketing expert, Brianna Yamashita, to help lead the discussion. Before we get started in our conversation, I want to let everyone watching know that 3 lucky viewers could win a copy of Hang the Moon with a signed bookplate. To enter for your chance to win, just leave a question for us in the comment section of this video, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible live on screen today. And now on to book club. Jeannette, thank you for joining us. Can you kick us off by telling us a little bit about Hang the Moon?
It's about a woman named Sallie Kincaid who lived 100 years ago, and her daddy is the big man in town, and she adores him and wants to be just like him and wants to get into the family business, which turns out to be whiskey making during Prohibition. But for all of the moonshine making and rum running and shootouts, it's really a story about family, about the roles that we play in family and how we break out of those roles if we should.
That's amazing. I loved this read. Yeah. And I think the first question I kind of have for you right off the bat is, you've said this is your first fully fictional novel. Yeah. How is Hang the Moon a new kind of writing for you? And do you have a preference?
You know, I'd always thought of myself as a truth teller, as a fact finder, and that I had no imagination. I was incapable of making things up. And my 3 previous books, a memoir, and then 2 books that were called novels, but they were based on people I knew and things I knew. And I thought I couldn't write anymore because I'd already kind of milked my family dry. But it was a reader who said, I think you have a great imagination, but you're afraid of your own creativity. And it really kind of knocked my socks off. That's one of the reasons I love talking to readers. And there was a story that I wanted to tell that had nothing to do with any members of my family. And I still kind of clung to facts, and that I researched the bejesus out of this story. But I had to make the characters my own. Like, you have to get beyond, most of the characters and the incidents are based on historical fact, but you have to get beyond the historical characters or they sound flat. So you have to make the people and the characters your own, and you got to kind of breathe life into them. And honestly, the best teaching I got on that was spending time on the set of the movie of The Glass Castle and watching these actors becoming members of my family, and watching the empathy with which they approached people who they never met and became people. And it was really very enlightening about understanding people without judgment, without barrier, and trying to make these characters sympathetic and complex. And not perfect, but you get them, and that was my goal.
Well, one of the things that I found that I mean, I feel like the setting of the book is as much a character as the characters. I mean, it's so rich, and I'm just curious, like, how did you arrive at Appalachian during Prohibition? Like, what did this time and setting allow you to do? Why this time? What intrigued you about it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I live in Virginia and I love Virginia. But Prohibition is so often told from an urban point of view. All of these great icons that we know about, the gangsters and the G-men. And, we folk up in the hill, we've just been reduced to these stereotypes of Snuffy Smith from Hoot and Holler. But there's a lot more to these people in this time. For many generations, making whiskey was the cash crop. So when the selling of whiskey became illegal, then all of a sudden these law-abiding folk became outlaws. And it was a fascinating time for these people, for America. America's trying to figure out who and what it was. And really Prohibition, it was a nativist movement, and it was an effort to move time backward. Let's return to a better time before these crazy Italians came in with their wine and the crazy Germans came in with their beer. Let's make America as good as it used to be. And a part of the other people who were not considered like us were the hillbillies. And it was a time of incredible change. I think it's very difficult for us to understand today the changes brought about by the automobile and electricity. And my people here in the mountains of Virginia were kind of late to get that. So they've been kind of stereotyped and borderlined and pushed into the background. And I wanted to make these people human and alive and to have people get their story. I was at a reading not long ago, and this African-American woman in Washington, D.C. said, I had no interest in reading this book about Virginia moonshiners. She said, but girlfriend, when did you meet my mother? So, she said, Sallie could have been my mother. So I love hearing stuff like that, because I think that sometimes we put up these barriers and these stereotypes and we think, oh, I'm not like them. But when you hear people's stories, that's when you make these connections. And I think you can do that through either fiction or nonfiction by creating believable characters and bringing the readers into that world.
I 100% agree. And I think historical fiction in that way can be really powerful, just because it's people finding stories that they connect with themselves and then retelling them or bringing pieces of that into the fiction. It's really a beautiful way to spread information and spread understanding about people that you might not have otherwise, ever met, physically or reading wise.
Yeah.
And kind of off of that, you spoke a little bit about how much research you've done for this book in general, but also in like the fact that you were reading about other people's stories, and that's kind of what inspired you.
Yeah.
Was there any piece of research that really stuck out and surprised you that you learned, or, anything that's really just stuck with you and you can't let go still?
Oh, there were so many things that I came across because I also love historical fiction, but it makes me nuts when the characters feel contemporary. So I spent so much time reading court transcripts and correspondence from that period, trying to get the language right. And there were just so many things that leapt out at me. There was an ad inviting women to a demonstration of a washing machine, convincing them that they would be able to fire their girl and save money. And they would lay it out. I mean, the washing machine was so revolutionary. Washing clothes was so difficult. I think that very often we idealize the past, but I believe that the cure for nostalgia is research. And having spent all of this time reading these newspapers, and that really was my biggest source of information, because not a whole lot was written by and about women moonshiners, but there was this trial of this county in Franklin County, Virginia. And one of the moonshiners, in fact, she was the pilot in the moonshine runs. And the pilot is the most dangerous position in the runs. And it was a woman, and she was the fastest, most fierce driver in all of the area. But reading these newspapers and the court transcripts, it just really hit home how difficult life was. and how hard everything was. And there was all this discussion of flies, and I kept on thinking, like, they'd advertise a hotel that was fly proof, and why are they so obsessed with flies? And then I was researching fly paper, and it said the sale of fly paper decreased greatly in the 1920s because of the car, and there was less horse manure around. I'm like, oh my gosh, of course. And that's the sort of thing that we don't think about, that that we want to think of the 1920s as the jazz era and flappers and everybody doing the Charleston. But it was very difficult, and it was a time of great transition and anxiety.
Yeah, it's really interesting to dive into those pieces of the puzzle, and like one doesn't, what is it? Causation doesn't call. I can't remember what the phrase is, but just like the piece of the puzzle of why there might be flies that would never have occurred to me. I might have thought about like refrigeration or something, but just the actual real life day to day of someone, it impacts everything in a much bigger way.
Yeah, I think that cars affected people so much, but women maybe even more than men. The mobility of being able to drive around, and I believe that that's why women started bobbing their hair. I never read that anywhere, but when they wore those great big old whoop-de-doo hairdos, that just didn't work in an open car, and most cars were open.
Yeah, that's fascinating to think about too. I mean, the more I thought about the cover and everything and why we have a car on the cover, it really does, make sense. I mean, it's integral, of course, in the book, but integral to that period of time and the freedoms that allowed women. And your Sallie, your main character, she is such a strong woman. She's tough. She's like, and as you say, she's growing up in really tough times, so she has to be tough. It's not necessarily that it's this anachronistic, oh, women wouldn't be like that. Like in this age and in this era, she has to be kind of that scrappy kind of person. And I mean, were you thinking when you were approaching writing this book, was she in your mind clearly, like that you were going to have this tough heroine, this tough female in these times?
She was always going to be a scrappy gal. She was always going to be a cookie. I was a quality that was admired in women, certainly in that place and time. I will also say that all of the characters initially were a lot more two-dimensional than they ended up being. I have a wonderful editor, Nan Graham, who just kept on pushing me to make everybody more realistic. But the book didn't work for a long time, and then I switched it into first-person present, and things kind of clicked. And I don't know why that made such a difference. It's just pronouns and verbs, but everything clicked. But Sallie is somebody who, she was born into a well-to-do family, and then she got booted from that family for a while and then came back. And I think that her having lived with the other family in a not well-to-do circumstance, I think it actually made her a better person, certainly stronger. But she came back to this well-to-do family with this idealized view of who and what they were. And she kind of has to rejigger all that and figure out, she's a fighter and a scrapper, and she knows what she wants, and she thought she knew this family. So she has to kind of rethink all that. So she comes back on the brink of adulthood to this man she adored so much as a child and has to really rethink some things. But yeah, she's a tough cookie.
I loved that piece of it too, because I think that even if you aren't kind of maybe exiled or leave physically, there is this difference that you have as a kid, right? You idolize your parents. And then when you grow up, you start to see them as humans. You start to see the flaws, and, they're not just like these perfect hero and heroines. They have their own lives and issues and things.
Exactly.
So I thought you have beautifully described that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, that was a goal of mine. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it was gorgeous. We have a question from one of our viewers on Facebook. Sandy says, I loved all of the characters and how their relationships were interwoven. How do you possibly keep everyone straight as to whom is related to whom? That's a great question.
First of all, thank you, Sandy. That is a great question. they were just very vivid in my mind. I knew these people. I knew them. I knew their foibles. Certainly by the end of the darn book, I just, Maddie wouldn't do this, or, this sounds out of character for Maddie. There were times when some of the dialogue was flat, and my husband and I would act out the scenes because he'd say, okay, I'll play this character. Now, and he said, just say whatever comes to mind, because I kind of got to know these people. And in fact, I did the audio for the book. And it was funny because I know how they all sound in my head. So when they're all from the South, but they have different accents from different parts of this village or town or this state. So I knew them, and there actually at one point were a few more characters, so I had to kind of let them go because believe it or not, this story was more complicated. But these are people I knew. I grew to I hesitate to say love, but I cared deeply about them all. So they were very distinct in my mind.
That's fantastic. It really comes through, I think, that you know and understand them because as a reader, we do too. We're like, and you get to they just feel like such well-formed people, and you're like, oh, that person's like my sister. I don't want to, whatever. I don't know what to say. I think that's such a great thing how you build these characters, and that's what drives you through the book, frankly. Is just you care about them and you care deeply about Sallie, and that's such a skill that you have in getting people to really empathize and see themselves in all of these characters. And there's no there's no flat bad guy. There's no, everybody feels pretty, fleshed out, which is fantastic.
Brianna, thank you. I tried. Because I think that's the way it is in real life. I do. I think that, people can do bad things, but they rationalize it in their head. And if you can get inside their head and explain it from their point of view, it doesn't necessarily excuse them, but it explains it. And as long as you can get that empathy, I think that's the writer's job. So thank you. I'm deeply grateful for that. Thanks.
Of course. And we actually have a question from another Facebook user named Vicky that refers back to your first book, Glass Castle. And she says it was such a moving memoir. Was it more liberating to write a fictional book because you weren't as invested in the characters as opposed to writing about your life and your family?
Well, Vicky, thank you, first of all. I don't know about liberating. Writing The Glass Castle was the most excruciating but rewarding experience in my life. I was completely unprepared for the reaction and for the warmth and the kindness. Readers understand me better than I understand myself. I've never been to therapy. I just hang out with book clubs. They get me. Fiction is I was kind of late in coming to fiction, and it was my husband who kept telling me it's not that different. And at first I thought that was blasphemy. I come from a journalism background. The truth is the truth and made up is made up. But he kept on saying, you use the tools of fiction in nonfiction and vice versa. And you can do things in fiction that you can't do in nonfiction. And the reverse is not true. That being said, when you write nonfiction, you keep on asking yourself what really happened. And when you write nonfiction, what would happen? So people say it's liberating, but I don't find it liberating because you just have to ask yourself, is this possible? Does this feel true? You don't have to ask yourself with nonfiction, could this have happened? Because it did, but when you're writing fiction, if it's not in my mind, if it's not believable, you lose that spell. That's part of the writer's job, is to create this universe and this cast of characters that are completely believable. And if you falter, then you've lost them. You don't have to worry about that in nonfiction. You do worry about people say, oh, you made that up. But, it's funny because in nonfiction, people say, oh, well, you made that up. In fiction, people say, oh, she took that from real life. So whatever. But I do believe they're more closely related than I used to believe.
I think that's really interesting. And I agree. I also think, as I said it kind of before, historical fiction really does feel like it's maybe closer to nonfiction in some ways, because there is so much research. There is so much kind of this background that you're doing and pulling from real stories. Before I jump into our next question, I just want to remind everyone watching that you could be entered to win a copy of the book and a signed book plate if you drop a question into the chat. I just always like to throw that reminder out there as we get, through our conversation. But actually, speaking of kind of those characters and writing in, from Sallie's perspective, And I don't know, maybe your husband has one too, since he was acting this out with you. Did you have a favorite character to write, or did you have a favorite character that was just like so fun to, act out that you just loved? Did your husband have a favorite one?
Well, I honestly, I love all of them. I mean, I have a soft spot in my heart for Sallie, flawed and demented as she can be at times. But I kind of grew to love all of them. Maddie was maddening, and at first she was more of a minor character, but then I kind of grew to love her. Like, let me pull her into the forefront a little bit more. But you know. Eddie, sweet Eddie, I really, Nell, I kind of love Nell with her plain spoken wisdom. I kind of grew to love each of them. So you're kind of asking which is my favorite child. But Sallie, of course, is my child. She was the person. I mean, I really channeled the story through her. And like I said, she changed a lot, and all of the characters changed a lot. They were all a little bit more two-dimensional, and I really worked on making them more sympathetic and more believable. So I love them all.
And we actually have a question, since you love, them all, and you can kind of, embody them and just understand who they are. Kathy from YouTube is wondering if you had any thoughts as to, if this were made into a movie or series, who would play that role of Sallie or any of the other characters? Have you thought about it at all?
I probably shouldn't answer this, but I'm going to anyway. I am so in love. And let me first preface this by saying it has been optioned for not a movie, but a streaming series. It has been optioned. And I am so in awe of actors after having spent time on the set of The Glass Castle that I think anybody can play. I mean, these actors are phenomenal. But, and I'm going to get her name wrong, but the young woman is Julia Garner or Warner in Ozark. The way she did that tough gal who I believed could cut my gizzard out with a boning knife, but I still wanted to protect her. She was such a tough cookie, but at the same time was so vulnerable. Any actor who can capture that combination of pretending that you're tough and that nothing can hurt you, but in fact, inside, you really are aching and needy. Julia, she captured it beautifully. And again, I have great faith in actors to do that. Watching Woody Harrelson, who really didn't look like my father, become my father, to the point that when I saw him in character for the first time, I burst into tears. So I was a mess. I was slinging snot and everything, and he was talking just like my dad, and it was kind of surreal. So these actors, I have huge faith in them to understand characters. Acting, like fiction writing, it's a process of empathy, and I think that the good actors, they become these characters without judgment, without they don't see their characters as good or bad. They just want to get inside their head. And that's why the earlier question about which one do I love the most, you just kind of you just embrace them completely.
I love that answer. And I think I can completely see that as a pick. And I think I can also trying to feel like Maisie Williams from Game of Thrones would be.
Yeah. Oh yeah, she'd be great.
Of course, I could be murdering all these names because I'm so bad.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of someone who is, still fierce and independent, but someone that you want to protect and you feel protective over.
Yeah. It's the contradiction.
Yeah.
It's the contradiction that makes characters so interesting. And I don't believe that truth is stranger than fiction. I believe it's more nuanced. And if you can capture that in fiction writing, then it's compelling. And these actors are so good at understanding, well, this character looks evil, but really is in a lot of pain, and they play both at once, and that's where these characters become so compelling, and you can't take your eyes off them, and you're rooting for them even though they're doing something bad.
Yeah. Honestly, too, when you were talking about watching the filming for Glass Castle, I cannot imagine what it must be like to watch people play family members, to kind of live that experience must be kind of disorienting.
It was beautiful. It was because they were so non-judgmental.
Yeah.
They just wanted to understand these wacky, complicated people who are my family. And they would ask these direct and beautiful questions about, well, why this and what happened here? And sometimes during the filming, they would actually tell the director, I don't think my character would do that. I don't think Rosemary would do that. And he's a wonderful director. And he'd say, well, what would she say? And they'd say something and they were right. And so, here they were creating dialogue.
Yeah.
And I was truly blown away and touched by the degree to which I was a mess too. I was crying like an idiot. But that these people, these fabulous, famous, wealthy people got it. They just got it. And I love them for it. It was without judgment, without barriers. Who are these people and what made them tick?
Yeah,
That's
and do you think,
incredible.
like, watching that process of the actors and wanna like, helped inform how you write dialogue or how you are kind of approaching that? I mean, you said that you and your husband acted out certain things. I mean, did that come apart after having had that experience, or did you always do that?
Absolutely. It was like taking a mini master class in in dialogue and acting. Like it really kind of changed the way I thought about making things up. Because as a truth teller, I thought I didn't, but then watching these people get at this truth that I don't even want to say imagining, it was something deeper than imagining. They were somehow um, uh, divining it. And I went to one of the actors. I said, "How did you do that? How did you know that my sister did that?" And they said, "It was all in the book. It was all in the words." And they just the degree to which they got character was so illuminating, and it stuck with me. And I am a lifelong student. I'm happy to learn wherever I can get it. And it was so many others have told me that having their book turned into a movie was one of the worst experiences in their life, and it was one of the most beautiful of my life. I just there was I love not only the actors, I love the wardrobe people, I love the makeup people, and just their passion for authenticity of capturing and recreating this world. And that is, I believe, what we fiction, now that I'm a fiction writer, what we fiction writers do too. We recreate the world, sometimes not as tangible and not as thoroughly. We don't absolutely everything, but when they were doing the interiors, they just, they had all of these props and like, what does this make sense? And let's put dust on it. And they got everything right. And it was very illuminating for me as a writer. Wow, this is how it's done.
And kind of off of that, like, transcribing a book, I guess, from written word into, although I guess it's still written word, into kind of the audio version of that, because now you've done you've done it for film, you know how that works.
Yeah.
How was that experience for you of translating Hang the Moon into audio? Did you enjoy it? I know some people love it. I know some people, and I should give this credit, by the way, to Shirley on YouTube. This is her question. She was dying to know about the audio version of it. But did you enjoy that process?
I loved it. I was really nervous about it because I'm not that good of a reader. My older sister read the entire Oz series aloud to me, and I don't think she stumbled once. And I'm not as good as she is. So I read the prologue about 12 times to make sure I wouldn't do any spoonerisms or anything. And I got there and I read it out loud, and I was a little nervous. And the producer said, "Well, that was good, but I'm second page, third paragraph, I didn't hear intentionality." Like, what do I look like, Meryl Streep here? Intention? What are you talking about? And I said, "I'm not an actor." And she said, "You did the voices, and I'm going to treat you like an actor." So she pushed me harder than I thought I could do, but I loved it. It's really hard, and the microphone is so sensitive. It picks up your stomach noises. It picks up these weird noises your mouth makes that you don't hear, these little clicks. So you got to do all these takes, and sometimes you stumble over a word or leave out a word. But there's an amazing audio team at SNS, so I'm very indebted to them. But yeah, I had a lot of fun. I was kind of wiped out by the end, and I couldn't say anything by the end because my mouth was so tired. But but we had a blast. Yeah.
That's incredible. I'm glad you had a really good experience, because it does seem, I will say, I think that would be incredibly daunting for me, even though it's not like video. I think something about having your voice, and having to do so many takes and trying to get all of that feeling in just voice and no video, it feels like a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Also, you can't wear noisy clothes. You can't wear anything silky because I'm moving all around. So you can't move because it makes noises. But again, I worked with a great team, and I do a little plug here for S&S. Everybody in the entire company has been great. So I'm really lucky. I know that.
Great. We'll turn it into our next commercial for S&S. I think we have time for one more question. Did you have something in mind, Colleen, or should we take a reader question?
Yeah, there's one question that came in from Facebook, and I think it's a great kind of way to wrap up, because you've had so much experience writing all different types of, novels, nonfiction. What advice would you have for teen writers and people who want to become writers? Do you know how do you dive in? How do you get started?
Yeah. Well, this is just my take, and for whatever it's worth. And there are smarter people than me who would disagree with this. I am a fast but sloppy writer, and I say just get it down. Don't worry about whether it's any good or not. Just get it down. If you sit there thinking, is this? What are people going to think of it? You're going to censor yourself. Just put it down, and you can always rewrite. There were 17 drafts of this dang thing, and sometimes when I'm writing a draft, I think this is so brilliant, and then I read it back. This is terrible, but you can rewrite it. And my husband has this great line. He said, one of the challenges of writing is you have to believe in it and question it at the same time. So you have to know that it can be good, but understand that it's not quite there yet. So look at everything and what am I trying to do? What emotion am I trying to evoke in the reader? What am I trying to say here? And just go over it time and time again. But find your own voice. I don't read other people's writing while I'm writing, because I found when I was writing The Glass Castle, I was reading Frank McCourt, Angela's Ashes. Of course, he's Irish, and all this blarney started creeping into, into my memoir. It's like, I don't talk like that, so I'm too influenced. But find the way that you speak. Listen to yourself, and don't worry about other people's judgment, because then you're going to be too inhibited. But just get it down and be honest. Don't be afraid to go there. Don't be afraid to say what's in your heart, because I will tell you, one of the many things that I have learned from having written a couple of books is readers are smart and they're compassionate and they get it. And if you're honest with it doesn't have to be truthful, but emotionally honest, that's what they connect with.
I think it's amazing advice. And honestly, kind of your advice about writing, I feel like goes back to how you treat your characters, which is understanding and no judgment, and just, kind of empathy towards the characters and the writing, which is.
And to yourself as a writer. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is
for yourself.
The best advice you could possibly give.
Embrace it.
I think that's a great place to end. I want to thank you guys for such an incredible discussion. I really had so much fun chatting with you both. And before we go, I just want to give one last reminder that you can still post a question in the comment section to be entered to win our Hang the Moon sweepstakes. I also wanted to call out that our next book club favorites read will be The Secret Book of Flora Lee by Patty Callahan Henry. You can join our Facebook group and follow us on Instagram for the latest updates. You can also keep up with Jeannette by following her on Instagram and Facebook. And finally, I just want to thank you guys so much for joining us today. I hope you both have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.